will always describe their victims' struggle as terrorism. But the destruction of Chechnya, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the slow genocide of the Armenian Palestinians, the continued war against the civilian population of South Lebanon, the NATO bombing of Belgrade, the American occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, with the tens of thousands of civilians who have been killed there, these will never earn the title of terrorism, even though civilians were targeted and terrorizing them was a purpose. Counterinsurgency, now popular again among imperialists, is another way of saying it's a question of national liberation struggles. Terror and intimidation are as essential to it as is winning hearts and mind. Normative rules are determined by power relations. The powerful side gets to determine what is legal and illegal. The powerful side seeks to weaken legal prohibitions that serve to prevent the weak from resisting. Concepts for the weak to resist become illegal by definition. Concepts like terrorism are invented and used normatively as if some kind of neutral court produced them and not an oppressor. The danger in this excessive use of legality is that it actually undermines legality. It diminishes the credibility of international institutions such as the United Nations. It becomes apparent to the weak that the powerful, those who make the rules, insist on legality merely to preserve power relations that serve them or to maintain their occupation and colonialism. Not all causes are created equal. The Basques or the Corsicans today can't justify attacks on Spanish or French civilians the way Palestinians can. Attacking civilians is the most basic method of resistance when you're confronted with overwhelming odds and imminent eradication. The Palestinians don't attack Israeli civilians with the expectation that they will destroy Israel. The land of Palestine is being stolen day after day. Palestinian people are being eradicated day after day. As a result, they respond in whatever way they can to apply pressure on Israel. And for that, I think they're above censure. Colonial powers use humans as weapons. They settle humans, claim land, and dispossess the population, whether they're Indians in North America or Palestinians in what is now Israel that occupied Palestinian territories. It's legitimate to attack these former civilians who have turned themselves into strategic weapons to settle occupied land, be they American colonists or Jewish settlers. When a native population sees that there's an irreversible dynamic that's taking away their land and identity, and it's supported by an overwhelming power, then everything is justified. Apart from the cause of Native Americans and Americans being colonized, the Jews during the Holocaust, blacks during centuries of slavery, I think no cause better justifies attacks on civilians than the Palestinian struggle for existence. In 2008, 19-year-old Qasem al-Mughrabi, a Palestinian man from Jerusalem, drove his car into a group of soldiers at an intersection. According to newspaper Haaretz, the terrorist was shot and killed. Well, at the time of the article, it wasn't even clear if it was a deliberate attack or a car accident. In two separate incidents in July 2008, Palestinians from Jerusalem also used vehicles to attack Israelis. These attackers were part of an organization. Although these Palestinian men were killed, senior Israeli officials called for their homes to be demolished. In a separate incident, Haaretz, a mainstream Israeli paper, wrote that a Palestinian woman blinded an Israeli soldier in one eye, she threw acid in his face. The terrorist was arrested by security forces, the paper said. But an occupied citizen attacks an occupying soldier, and she's the terrorist. An occupation that lets Jewish extremists go on pogroms, killing Palestinians with impunity, in which Israeli soldiers watch Palestinian women wailing in labor at checkpoints, but refuse to let them pass and go to the hospital, killing the babies and sometimes the women too. President Bush spoke after the war at the United Nations. He said no cause could justify the deliberate taking of human life, but the U.S. has killed thousands of civilians in airstrikes on populated areas. When you drop bombs on populated areas, knowing there will be some collateral civilian damage, but you accept it as worth it, and it's deliberate. When you impose sanctions, as the U.S. did on Saddam or Iraq, that killed hundreds of thousands, and when you say that deaths were worth it, as did Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, then you deliberately kill people for a political goal. When you seek to shock and awe, as President Bush did when he bombed Iraq, you're engaging in terrorism. And just as the traditional American cowboy film presented the whites under siege or the Indians as the aggressors, the opposite of reality, so too Palestinians become the aggressors, not the victims. Beginning in 1948, nearly 800,000 Palestinians were deliberately cleansed and expelled from their homes, and hundreds of their villages were destroyed or renamed with Hebrew names. Their land was settled by colonists who went on to deny their very existence and wage a 60-year war against the remaining natives and the national liberation movements that Palestinians established around the world. Just today, a Hamas leader was killed in Dubai by suspected Israeli agents. Every day, more of Palestine is stolen, more Palestinians are killed, The mere state of being Israeli, therefore, is an act of dispossession and of murder, particularly when there is universal military service to support the occupation and deny the Palestinian refugees the right to return to their homes, a right enshrined in international law. It's not that as Palestinians they have the right to use any means necessary. It's because they're weak. The weak have much less power than the strong and can do much less damage. The Palestinians would not be bombing cafes if they had tanks and airplanes. It's only in the current context that their actions are justified, and there's obvious limits on not justifying use of nuclear weapons. There are limits to the argument, and it's impossible to make a universal ethical claim or establish some kind of Kantian principle justifying any act of resistance against colonialism or domination by an overwhelming power. And there are other questions which I have trouble answering. Can an Iraqi be justified in attacking the U.S.? After all, this country was attacked without provocation and destroyed, with millions of refugees created, hundreds of thousands of dead, and this after 12 years of bombing and sanctions. Sanctions have killed many and destroyed the lives of many others. I could argue that all Americans have benefited from their country's exploits without having to pay the price. That in today's world, the imperial machine is not merely the military, but a military civilian network, companies and corporations. I could also say that the Americans elected the Bush administration twice, and elected representatives who did nothing to stop the war. And the American people themselves did very little, and didn't even care. And today President Obama continues these very same policies. So maybe they deserve to feel some of the pain too. From the perspective of an American or an Israeli or a Russian or a Chinese in Tibet, if you're strong, everything you do is justifiable, and nothing you weak do is legitimate. So it's really a question of which side you choose, the side of the weak or the strong. And as the attacks I described demonstrate, even organizations sorry about this. One pages got mixed up. After the war in Gaza, Hamas leaders threatened more suicide attacks. And in the long term, it's Israel that's being suicidal, making sure that Jews might have a future in the Middle East. There's no viable future for a Zionist Israel that denies equal rights and democracy to the millions of Palestinians who are either unequal citizens of Israel, or live under Israeli occupation, or live in exile longing for their homes. The future lies in integration, reconciliation, and justice. Israeli settlements, land expropriation, and separation barriers have long since made a two-state solution impossible. There can be only one state in historic Palestine. In coming decades, Israel will be confronted with two options. Will they peacefully transition towards an equal society, where Palestinians are given the same rights, such as post-apartheid South Africa? Or will Israelis continue to view democracy as a threat? If so, one of the peoples will be forced to leave. Colonialism has only worked when most of the natives have been exterminated. Palestinians remain. They remain steadfast. Sometimes, though, as in occupied Algeria under the French, it's the settlers who end up fleeing. Eventually, the Palestinians will not be willing